Hello, everyone. My name is Mufti Ismail. Welcome to another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, powered by Macozy, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than climbing the corporate ladder. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the show will also be available on podcast tomorrow morning. So if you are watching live, please drop a one in the comments so that we know we're not talking to ourselves. And if you're watching the recording, drop a two in the comments. My guest for this week is Mufti Ismail Desai, CEO and Chairperson of Global Islamic Financial Services Firm, an advisor to the Reserve Bank of Malawi, and an advisor to various insurance companies, charities, banks, and financial services companies. He's conducted deal advisory to the value of over $4 billion US. Mufti Ismail, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Uwais, and looking forward to this very.
To jump straight into questions, maybe tell us your story, where do you come from, and who is Mufti Ismail Desai? Give us the backstory.
So, this is a very interesting question, and I'd like to start off by saying that I was born in a religious family. My father is an extremely well-known Sharia scholar, having studied the traditional sciences, and I grew up in Isipingo Beach, which is not far from Durban, and we grew up from very humble beginnings. And I went to primary school at the local government school. Thereafter, at Standard 4, I went to Pietermaritzburg, where my dad moved closer to Pietermaritzburg to teach at an Islamic seminary. I then did my schooling up until matric, and side by side, continue, or a person who has memorized the Quran from cover to cover. By the age of 14, I had completed the memorization of the Quran, and I then spent 1 year, revising the Quran and basically strengthening my memorization. Thereafter, at the age of 15, I started what is called the Alimiya degree or qualification, which is an Islamic traditional qualification, where essentially we studied, we studied the Arabic language, we studied the aspects of syntax of the Arabic language, Arabic morphology, which is referred to as sarf. We studied Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh. We studied Islamic polemics in relation to specifics on anthropomorphism, in relation to the belief system and creed of the Muslim, and we studied various other religious books and subjects. I then qualified at the age of 21, and previous to that, or side by side, while doing my religious studies, I had also qualified, with the matric qualification in South Africa, which is what is referred to as grade 12 in South Africa, or similar to, in the UK, you have the higher, qualification. Once I had completed that study, I then, concluded a 2-year study, which is a post-qualification study in the IFTA course, which is a postgraduate course in becoming a pseudo scholar, referred to as a mufti, which is a pseudo juro consult, referred to as one of the highest qualifications that one could receive in Islamic religious standing. During that qualification, I documented close to 1,500 special Islamic rulings or edicts in terms, which is what is referred to as fatwa, or Islamic legal edicts issued to people globally. And it was a very interesting time for me, having, practically applied my knowledge that I had learned over the last 6 odd years in the confines really of a religious seminary, and that opened my mind to a certain extent to how knowledge could be applied and expressed, to create value to millions globally. And I recall, answering questions from people in Thailand, in Malaysia, in France, in Switzerland, in terms of answering their questions from a religious perspective. And that really opened up my mind. So, post that qualification, I then, had a very keen interest and passion for finance. Um, and so just to retrace from that, so that's the whole religious piece. But just to retrace from that, from a young age, I was very interested in entrepreneurship. So, those of you who may remember that when one's parents went overseas for the annual Hajj or Islamic pilgrimage, they would come back with specific gifts, from Saudi Arabia, which were unique, at that time. Some of these, stationery, sweets, etc. And I was very interested in entrepreneurship, so I would, take these sweets and specific stationery and toys, etc. And I would sell them at school. But I used to do them hiding because my parents, being of a religious background, they wanted me to be more involved in religious study, etc. So under that circumstance, I would sell, I would make money, I would sell, I would make money, and my passion for entrepreneurship really grew from there. So even during my religious study years, and I normally don't give this example, but I think because this is a specific platform where we want to encourage people, that what where you do what it takes to persevere and get across the line. So I had a very strong passion for entrepreneurship combined with agriculture. And I remember, once thinking about establishing a poultry venture, a chicken poultry venture. And my parents obviously wouldn't approve this. Being typical Indian parents, they said, we can't have these chickens, in our backyard, and the smell is going to be too much, etc. And I said, well, where there's a will, there's a way, and true to that. On one weekend when my parents went out, for shopping, I decided to stay at home. I rode my bicycle for about 7 kilometers to a chicken hatchery, and I purchased myself chicks, these small chicks. Now I'm thinking to myself, how do I transport these chicks 7 kilometers back home? And I said to the secretary of the hatchery, can you get me a box? So I got a box. I took a piece of string and I tied it to the back of my bicycle, and I rode 7 kilometers back home with the chicks. And after I got home, I'm like, okay, now how do I get this thing to work? And then I had a friend who was a farmer, and I said, look, I want to start this venture, but we have to do this thing in secrecy. No one can know about it. So so he then gives me a brooder, to keep the chicks warm, and that's how I started my first business venture in total secrecy and with a lot of grit and determination. You know, riding chicks off the back of a bicycle. So fast forward to that. Once I'd completed my qualification, my religious qualification, now being what is called a mufti, which is a very strong religious title in the Muslim community. I then said, look, I have a very keen interest in finance, but how do I marry the financial or the conventional financial system with the Islamic economic system. And I then decided to study finance and banking at the London School of Economics, which was, and still is, the epicenter of finance and banking globally. The London School of Economics and Political Science is a very prestigious institution, and they had accepted me based on merit. And I really enjoyed my time there, and subsequently to that, I got accepted into a major banking institution in London, in central London. Learning about banking, doing billions of dollars of transactions on a daily basis, placing treasuries, treasury bonds, trading stocks, bonds on a daily basis. So that was basically my childhood and early learning. Um, you know, uh, you know, uh, uh, you know, um, you know, from my perspective.
No, that gives us a good base to work from. So, talk us a little bit. I mean, you mentioned Islamic finance, but is it only appropriate to the Islamic world? How suitable is it for everybody else?
So look, this is a very, very good question, and a lot of people have the misconception that Islamic finance or Islamic banking is only for Muslims, but that is incorrect. Islamic finance and Islamic banking is for all the faiths. And just to give you some um, some some um, some context, so the Islamic finance industry, obviously, as the name suggests, was started by the Prophet Muhammad, 1400 years ago. And in that era, there were Jews, there were Christians, but they all followed the precepts of Islamic finance, because in the markets of Medina, in the medieval markets of Medina, that was the rule of law when it came to finance. And you had a sophisticated system of the Baitul Mal, which was the public treasury that was run on Islamic principles. You had the Ashabus Suq, or the public monitors, that would go out there and monitor the markets to ensure that the markets are being conducted in a Sharia compliant manner. So Islamic finance is not only for Muslims, but also for non-Muslims. And what you would be surprised to know is that in South Africa, 10% of Al Baraka Bank's customers are non-Muslim. If you look at Malaysia, 20% of all Islamic banking customers are actually non-Muslim. So they fully understand the precepts of Islamic banking, finance, and economics, and they like the fixity in returns, and the ethical nature of Islamic finance and banking. And to that point, we had a discussion around ESG finance, and whether Islamic finance accepts ESG finance. What does Islamic finance have to say about green finance, about ESG, etc.? And you know, uh, and I mentioned that Islamic finance or Sharia law actually promotes green funding and ESG funding, because the Prophet Muhammad himself mentioned in a prophetic tradition that do not cut off a tree unnecessarily if you don't need to cut off a tree, and do not waste water even if it means that there is water from a running stream. So these prophetic traditions teaches us that we as Muslims also are perhaps the greatest proponents of etc. So in other words, to answer your question, definitely Islamic finance is for all faiths, Muslim and non-Muslim.
And let's say for the young professional out there thinking is interested in learning about Islamic finance or working in the Islamic finance industry, do they need a qualification in that, or is it something that you can get involved in without a qualification and maybe learn as you're going?
So that's a very good question. So I mean, there are two things. The first is that when it comes to Islamic finance, a lot of the learning can be gained from from doing courses, reading books on Islamic finance, etc. When it comes to a career, then I would suggest three things. The first is that um, in terms of learning, there are various courses like SEMA, etc., where one can take these courses, and get an official qualification around Islamic finance. And besides that, there are other qualifications there, like the Malaysian Institute of Islamic Finance, and other institutes that have specific Islamic finance qualifications and programs. But and that brings me to the second point, is that when it comes to the career path of most Islamic finance professionals, it stems out of them joining a conventional institution, and from there really working their way from a conventional position into an Islamic finance position. So what I mean by this is that let's say if you are um, you know um, a bank manager, or you are an MD at a financial institution. Now you are managing conventional financial instruments. So in other words, that you can then be a proponent of Islamic finance and move from a conventional position to an Islamic financial position. And this is what we have seen over a period of time, that this is perhaps one of the best ways for a career in Islamic finance.
Okay, no, that's a great answer. A reminder that if anybody's got any questions for Mufti Ismail, please add them to the comments, and we'll deal with the questions at the end. Mufti Ismail, I mentioned earlier that you've been involved in deal advisory for over about $4 billion US. What type of companies do you get involved in?
So investment banking is a very high stakes, exciting and adventurous career. And obviously, being at an investment bank previously taught me the intricacies around deal making and structuring deals. So we typically get involved in mergers and acquisitions, putting companies together in terms of different strategies. So say, for example, a company is looking for vertical integration around a particular subsector of their industry. So we then proceed to procure a target. We'd also arrange, for the funding for that target, and manage, the entire financing process of that M&A and acquisition deal. Secondly, is we do a lot of bond issuances. So, from an Islamic perspective, we term this as sukuk or Islamic bonds. So essentially, we we do due diligence on a company or corporate looking to raise capital. We then suggest to them the optimal capitalization structure to issue a bond, and we then issue the bond. Thirdly is we do a lot of corporate capital raising in terms of raising capital for companies, whether it be through capital markets or debt capital markets. Finally, the different deal advisory that we do, and besides that, just Sharia structuring in terms of structuring products for banks and financial institutions. So we've structured over 740 financial products globally, almost from anything, equity, vanilla type funds, Islamic derivative products. Recently we commoditized met from Germany onto London Metal Exchange, where Islamic banks can use the funds from their treasury to fund the trades. So we've done vanilla type of products right up to very sophisticated type of products. So that's pretty much my experience around the deal advisory space.
Okay, and like Talk to us about your role as being an advisor to the Reserve Bank of Malawi. I mean, that sounds like a very, very big responsibility.
Yeah, that's one of the different roles that I play. So, for example, I sit as an advisor, special advisor to the South African National Zakah Fund, SANZF, advisor to several banks, institutions, and obviously including the Reserve Bank of Malawi. So, the Reserve Bank of Malawi is a very interesting case. I mean, we have been engaging with the National Bank of Malawi, which is wholly owned by the Malawian government. And through our contact with the National Bank of Malawi and training their staff over a period of time, we were then introduced to the Reserve Bank of Malawi to draft the guidelines around Islamic banking. And it's been very interesting, working from a regulatory perspective to drive change, to drive value, and it's been extremely invigorating and interesting to understand, the thought processes around promoting Islamic finance from a top-down perspective. Typically, we've been focusing on a bottom-up approach, but from a Reserve Bank perspective, it's from a top-down approach, from a regulatory perspective, where you simply cannot provide advice and expect the advice to then be implemented immediately. There could potentially be bills that need to be implemented at a parliamentary level, and potentially be endorsed by the finance minister or by the president himself. So those are the type of serious level discussions that I've been privileged to have at that level, and it's also a great responsibility because the type of change that you can drive at that level is immense. I mean, if we had to change certain bills, to enact Islamic finance at a parliamentary and governmental level, those changes could be long lasting even after we've passed on. That is a kind of legacy that I would like to leave behind.
Okay, I mean, it gives us a good understanding. And I know you probably, I mean, your company should be based partly in Durban, partly in Dubai. So how do you end up being an advisor to institutions in Russia, Botswana, England, Kazakhstan, Pakistan? I mean, it seems like you're covering the globe.
So, so when we started the firm, we set change at a global level, and we said, how do we do this? And we sort of thought of the bigger picture and said, look, we'd be happy to be an investment bank of choice for Islamic financial institutions at a strategic level, globally. And with that vision, we then developed this extremely strong network over a period of time, to then be introduced to banks and financial institutions globally. So currently GIFS, we are we have clients in close to 26 countries globally. So you're talking Russia, UK, France, the UAE, African countries. We now just signed an MOU with 3 South American governments to introduce Islamic finance. So it's extremely it's extremely exciting, but it's also a huge responsibility, and it does come with a lot of workload. So it's not it does take up many hours, but as I always say that if you have fun and you're passionate about something, then it doesn't bother me to spend more hours.
Okay. Before we jump into questions, I'm gonna ask my favorite question. What is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
So I think you know like everyone else that has been on the show, you know, would always, um, think about, the mistakes that one could have, averted. And I think that the one piece of advice that I would have, given myself, was to to sort of think about um, value creation at a massive scale, thinking about um, the about long-term goals. Very often as young people, we think about short-term goals. 2-month goals, 1-year goals, 2-year goals, and I think if I was maybe 20 years, I would have definitely changed my mindset to think about longer term goals, with the view of creating massive change, to drive value and solve greater problems.
That's a good advice. Let's move a little bit to questions. We've got one question here from Ngalazo Piri. He says, "Why haven't we seen more Islamic banks in Malawi?" Any thoughts on that?
So look, you know, in Malawi, we've seen a very slow interest and introduction of Islamic finance, um, simply because you have the government introducing legislation at a very slow pace. So there has been a pretty stop-start relationship in terms of introducing Islamic banking in Malawi. But what we would have to say is that I think that probably in the next 2 to 3 years we could see much more rapid development of Islamic finance in Malawi as the government speeds up development of legislative changes at a legislative perspective.
Oh, that's great. And any last few words from you or anything we didn't discuss that you want the audience to know?
So I think that you know if there could be that I could share in terms of my brief learnings as a young business person and religious leader seeking to drive change, I would say that firstly, your network determines your net worth. And I know this sounds like a cliche saying, but if you really believe in it, and you seek to build strong networks uh, with meaningful relationships. Ray Dalio has a saying that he promotes meaningful work with meaningful relationships. So really, I think it's important to create strong networks with meaningful relationships and meaningful conversations, so that the strength of those relationships will carry you through your development in business and in terms of your career development. Um, and secondly, um, in terms of knowledge and skills development, I think that what you learn at university level is not the beat at all of your learning. There's still a lot more learning that can be done, going forward. And if you think about just a simple exercise of reading, the average CEO reads like 50 books per annum. And Warren Buffett reads approximately 500 pages every day. Now, we're not asking the average person to read 500 pages daily, but at least try to endeavor to read, gain a good understanding of the pulse of business going forward. And there's a lot of innovation out there, and real world learnings that one can learn from. And you can open up your mind. And I would say lastly that ideas and talk is cheap. These days there are a lot of ideas and a lot of talk around, innovation, etc. But execution is what drives growth. If you can't execute and you can't, get going and get started on your idea and simply take that leap of faith. I give people this example that, if you cannot, take that leap of faith, and leave your job, leave your paycheck. You don't have to do it in a very uncheckered, non-gated manner. You could save up maybe for a year, for example, and really pursue your dreams and your life goals. Because as Einstein said it, he said, it's insanity to think that you could change your position by doing the same thing on a daily basis. So if you keep on doing the same thing on a daily basis and think that something's going to change, then I think that's the very definition of insanity. And this is exactly the words of Einstein. So I mean, if there's one piece of advice I would give anyone, is that think about execution. Think about building an A team of experts. Surround yourself with good people, and as they say, the five people that you spend the most amount of time with will make up who you are. So if you're spending your time with people who have no idea about growth, and developing themselves, and they always have negative energy, that you yourself will become negative. If you want to be positive, if you want to grow, seek people that are higher than you. I mean, if you are, let's say, a beginner entrepreneur, seek out leaders in business and entrepreneurship who are, much more wiser and have experience than you. So you'll be forced to then level up to them. If you are, just as an example, if you are a $10 million entrepreneur, find an entrepreneur that's worth $100 million, because then you'll be forced to level up to get to that level, and you'd never be comfortable. So those are the last, few parting advices or thoughts from my side.
No, I think that's a good way to end it from your side. Just a reminder to everyone, the show is live on YouTube and will be available on the podcast by tomorrow. If you're watching on YouTube or the podcast and you feel that this has added value to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. We're still having our weekly discussion on Clubhouse about business and investing in South Africa. Join us on Mondays at 5 p.m. Central African time, and contact me if you need a Clubhouse invite. Mufti Ismail, thank you so much for your time. I sincerely appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Luis.
Thank you.
I think this was very insightful.
And thank you very much for joining us for another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, powered by Makosi. Goodbye.